Parents, what's the weirdest thing you've come home to find a babysitter doing? Well, when I was young I had a babysitter who was awesome at pretending and seemed really into the stories I would make up for my toys. A few years later my father received a phone call at 3 AM. It was my babysitter claiming that the men on CNN are trying to kill me. They are trying to kill me with the anthrax. My dad called the cops. Apparently they found her on the ground in her house. In an adult's diaper. Topless. Holding a phone book and crying for her mommy. Yeah, it turns out the reason she was so awesome at pretending was because she was not pretending. She was completely batshit crazy. Kinda the opposite. The parents came home to me taking a picture of their refrigerator. The husband has written "I love good HRNYB" the for fun in magnetic letters and forgot about it. Until they saw me taking a picture. Edit. They gave me $50 for 2 hours and never called me again. They won't even look me in the eye when I see them around the neighborhood. She had brought her laptop and had been doing a striptease on cam. I came home to find the babysitter had left. One kid was 2 and the other was 6 months old. Fortunately they were asleep. But I still couldn't believe it. We had a friend's daughter looking after the kids for the first time, and when we got home, she had reorganized almost everything in the house. Not just a shelf or two. Like everything. After she left, my wife and I spent quite a bit of time walking around, finding other things she had been into. The kitchen was completely reordered. Closets had different things in them. All of my CDs, DVDs, etc. I was very anal about how that stuff was organized back then. What she did drove me nuts. There wasn't a particular obvious pattern to what she'd done either. No clear system that made sense to us. Just random, unintuitive changes. It was super creepy. We never called her again. Long-time babysitter here. Once a kid's parents walked in on him licking carpet because I dared him to. They had a good laugh and still refer to it when they see me. Edit. Haha, didn't even realize the potential innuendo when I posted last night. No guys. He was literally licking the carpet floor. If it was any other way I doubt the parents would be laughing about it. When my sister and I were younger we had an absolute favorite babysitter. We would play goofy games like we'd run around the house and she would grab us up and put us in like prison on the kitchen table. My mom came home one day to see my sister screaming and running around the house and me laughing my ass off standing on the kitchen table. It was bizarre, but we had so much fun. When I was 8 years old, my parents went out to dinner. They left me and my sister, 5, with a babysitter who happened to be my friend's sister. We were always pretty self-contained kids. So we were quietly playing with our toys and having a good time. The babysitter was only really there to make sure we didn't hurt ourselves. But apparently she wanted to be more involved. At about 9 PM, she screams for us to come into the living room. She then tells us that she saw a man outside wearing a mask and looking through the windows and tells us to get down and be very quiet. I want to reiterate that I was 8 years old and had a 5-year-old sister and we were told a criminal was outside by an authority figure. So we get down on the floor. Insanely scared. We're there for about 10 minutes when we hear the handle of the door turning. My sister is silently sobbing. Our parents then walk in. Asked what was going on. And then never hired that girl again. Edit. To be clear, there wasn't anyone outside the house. A friend's dad lost his virginity to his babysitter after convincing her to play strip poker with him. He was 11. And she was 18. Stark naked doing her laundry. Did not want to be rude by borrowing a robot towel. But using our washing machine and dryer was okay. Sitting butt naked all over our furniture, that too was okay, but no borrowing a robot towel. Too f-king and polite. I once came home to my twin sister gleefully tying up Patty awesome babysitter dude. He was on the phone with his girlfriend and figured it would keep my sister occupied. So what was the harm? The harm being that when there's one twin, the other one is eventually going to come back from the circus. And that twin knows where the rest of the clothesline rope is. And the yarn. We had him eventually so wrapped up that he could hardly move. Then he got off the phone and asked us to untie him. Now why would we do that? He got a little mad. And finally gave us the ultimatum: untie him now, or he would call my parents from the phone we foolishly tied to his hand in our 8-year-old glee. He would give us to the count of 3. And then they were getting a call. After about 5 minutes of haggling with us, he finally started the countdown. 1. 2. Asterisk. And that's when my parents walked in at that very minute. I know I'm kind of late, but I was a single child and my mother was a heroin addict and she had left me with a friend on New Year's Eve to go out. But she had paid him in heroin and told him not to do it while he was watching me. Obviously that didn't happen. And he took all of it and started to nod off and OD. I was in 7th grade and had my best friend over. And I knew all about it. Long childhood. Another story for another day, and I knew he was probably going to die if I didn't do something. After panicking for a few minutes I decided I had to figure it out. So I took him in the bathroom, stripped him naked, and put him under a cold shower and started slapping him in the face. He was staying conscious, which was nice. Eventually I knew he would get too cold and I had to do something else. So dried him off and got him dressed again and formulated a plan. We didn't have a phone in the house, so I knew I couldn't ask a neighbor to call without them finding out my mom's addiction, so I decided on going to a payphone. Remember those? In the area. It was freezing out and I figured as long as he was moving he wouldn't die. So I scrounged up some change and told my friend, who was freaking out, that he was suffering an allergic reaction to a medication and I needed to get him help and I would be right back. We stepped out into the blustering cold and started walking. He was still completely out of it and was falling all over the place. I lived in a semi-suburban area and it was an arduous journey to the closest place I though would have a payphone. As it turns out, grocery stores don't have readily accessible phones outside. But he was coming to a little bit. So I started the walk back. Tears streaming down my face and chapping my cheeks. Finally we got back to the house and I was confident he wouldn't OD. So I sat him down in a chair in the kitchen and sat across from him and just watched him to make sure he survived. My friend had fallen asleep and it was well past 2 in the morning. My mother not returning for another hour or so. Without pouring into another story, he still thanks me to this day, I'm in my 20s, for saving his life. Unfortunately he's serving a 5-year sentence for issues related to his addiction. Man. It really felt nice to get that out. I've never really talked about my shitty childhood, which subsequently made me who I am. The best part is no one will see this because it's such a long front page post and I'll be way at the bottom. Close bracket. Edit. Row. Thanks for Reddit Gold. That's the perfect follow-up to waking up early from a dream where I was Spider-Man and then my alarm woke me up right when I got to shoot web for the first time. When I was little, around 8 or so, I discovered my dad's dirty magazines. I didn't get off to them or anything. I just thought that they were interesting. Whenever I had a babysitter, always also female, I would convince her to let me look at them. And she would usually join in. One time I found a porn VHS under my mom's bed. I showed it to one of my babysitters and she let me put it in the TV. I had never seen sex before, but I knew what it was. We just sat there and watched it. We watched it every time she came over. My mother was an alcoholic, so I spent a lot of time with different babysitters. One day I went through my mom's personal bedside drawer and found her dildos. My babysitter would strip naked and pretend to put them inside her. Never actually did. Thank God. We would make blanket forts and pretend our pay each other. Usually a soap opera like dramatization of no. Stop. Double quote. My mom came home more drunk than usual one night. Stripped down. And started dancing on a table. Then she suggested the three of us go skinny dipping in the backyard kiddie pool. The babysitter got naked, but I decided to keep a shirt on. Looking back, it seems really effing weird, but at the time it seemed chill. As far as I know, nothing was really overtly sexual. I was never touched or threatened. I just thought sex looked cool. TLDR, watched porn with my babysitter. She and my mom got naked together. PSSH. I've been babysitting two little boys for about 5 years. The worst their parents have ever come home to has been me asleep on the couch. When you have wonderful kids, pay your babysitter well. Cook your babysitter dinner. Leave her chocolate in the fridge and have 2 computers so the kids don't have to fight over them. You're pretty much the best parents a babysitter could hope for. I am a 30-year-old male. But when I was in middle high school, I did a lot of babysitting and had a few regulars. This is the last time I babysat for one of them. I was very sick, but they called and asked me to babysit. I advised them I was sick but would do it if they really needed me to. They said they did. So I went over. They had 3 daughters, and the middle one was also sick. So I went through the normal routines and got them to bed. But the middle one just wouldn't stay down. So I said she could watch a movie with me, as I wasn't up for anything else. Well, I flicked through the cable channels and found a kid-friendly movie, and laid down on the couch. Well, due to my illness, I promptly fell asleep. I guess in my sleep the 5-year-old crawled up on me and fell asleep on top of me. And there we were till the parents came home. And in the meantime the movie changed from a kid-friendly one to a very adult one. And the parents came home to me on the couch, with their 5-year-old on top of me, with a sex scene in a movie playing on their big screen. They didn't really listen to my explanations. They drove me home, this was before I could drive, and never called me again. I felt terrible. And they were a great family to babysit for. Their daughters liked me, and were easy to handle. And their house was a nice place to chill after the kids went to sleep. Edit. I don't remember what movies we watched. The first movie was not a kids movie, but it wasn't inappropriate for kids. A family movie. And we picked it up more than halfway through. The second movie I literally only saw just a few moments of it, in a hot and heavy sex scene. I don't remember which cable channel it was. I've never had cable in my life, so I don't know the channels really. But it was probably close to 9 when I put on the one move. And it was after midnight when the other movie was on and the parents woke me up. Remember, this was more than 15 years ago. So having a boy babysitter was not as offensive as it was today. I worked off of referrals, so I had a good reputation. A lot of families liked me because I didn't put up with BS from the kids. I was bigger than them and a lot more intimidating than a female sitter. So the kids listened to me. And I've always had a way with kids. And being a dad now, I appreciate the opportunity I had to work with kids. My wife and I had planned for months to go to this fancy restaurant for our anniversary. But our babysitter decided not to show up. In a rush, we went on Craigslist and phoned up one of the first babysitters we saw. He looked like a nice, clean young man that seemed to have a good background with kids, and we thought it would be safe to leave our son with him. So about halfway through the dinner, we get a call from our 5-year-old son crying that he is scared and we need to get home. However, the call was interrupted by someone yelling, "Where did you get that?" and what sounded like someone grabbing the phone from him and hanging up. Scared out of our minds, my wife and I rushed home as fast as we could to see what happened. Silly us didn't call 911. Close bracket. When we walked in the home, we were greeted by that same babysitter holding a gun to my son's head, threatening to kill him. He said as long as we help him out, he would let my son live. When I asked what exactly he meant by helping him out, he said he was flat broke and needed money. I would easily give up everything I owned to save my son's life. So I asked him exactly how much he needed. This sick fucker smirked and replied about $350. That's when I realized this babysitter was actually an 8-story tall crustacean from the Paleozoic era. This goddamn Loch Ness monster had tricked me again. But unfortunately I had no choice but to give him his money. Needless to say, after that night I never trusted anyone I met off the internet. And only hired babysitters I know. TLDR. I hired a babysitter off the internet. It turned into a hostage situation. I saw this film where a babysitter sits on the kid's father CCK repeatedly. I'd give it IO. Not a parent myself, but I imagine the parents remember me. And I remember the steaming embarrassment. My ex-girlfriend lived a couple of streets away from her uncle. When we were about 18-19 years old, he used to ask us to babysit for his 4-year-old and 2-year-old. It was never a problem because they were usually going to bed when we arrived, so him and his wife could go out. They said we could eat and drink what we like, make ourselves at home, and they usually came back around midnight. They moved to a new house after the first time that was actually closer to my girlfriend's house, and it was a lovely place. A big Victorian 4-bedroom with a huge downstairs living room, etc. We used to snuggle up on the sofa in front of the fire and watch TV and play with the cat. On the third occasion we had got a bit comfortable being there, and we used to go into the kitchen and mix drinks, eat ice cream, and randomly play with each other. We had gotten a bit tipsy from mixing drinks and got clothes on the sofa, pulling a blanket over us and passionately kissing. We got hot and sweaty under there. I took my jumper off and she undid my belt. I remember the scene perfectly because she had just her bra on, holding her big bust as she lapped at my cock. The moonlight was coming through the blinds and the TV created lighting like a movie scene or something. To cut a long story short, I ended up on top of her with her face down in the sofa with the blanket over us. I had been working myself into her ass for about 10 minutes, and by this time I was giving her long strokes, balls deep, and she was pretty much crying with pleasure and pain. It was nowhere near midnight when I heard the F-king key in the door. It came open and I looked up to see them both come into the hallway putting their jackets up. I simply kept my girlfriend's head down and pushed her further into the back crease of the sofa cushions. I hope to God they did not need to come through the lounge to the kitchen, but it was too late. I quickly put my head on the pillow on the one end and positioned myself so it looked like I was asleep. They saw me and whispered at each other as they crept through the lounge. I was sweaty profusely. My CCK was all the way in my girlfriend's ass and slowly getting smaller as I couldn't f***ing believe what was happening. As soon as they were through, I got up and made my girlfriend go to the bathroom in the hall, her clothes in hand. The parents came back through into the lounge and I was sat up in the darkened room. I tried to keep it together and fake yawn myself an alibi. My girlfriend came back in the room. She was flushed but quickly came out with a story about falling asleep together watching a film. They bought it, as far as I could tell, and handed over the money they promised. I've never been so relieved to step out into the fresh air. Not a parent, but one time while we were in France, I was probably 9ish. My sisters were like 6 and 3. My parents went out to dinner and left us with a babysitter they had found through a local agency. I was old enough to handle myself, but they figured being in a foreign country and having such a young child they should have someone there anyways. I don't remember anything from that experience, but from what my parents tell me, they came home to find the babysitter upstairs in one of the bedrooms on her phone. My youngest sister on the floor bleeding because she had waddled into a table and fallen and cut her head. And the other two of us hiding in the bathroom. Sorry that I am not a parent, but as a child who was babysat quite frequently in the 90s, I have some tales. A little background info to start. My next door neighbor was the popular quarterback for the local high school. He's an awesome guy, and this is in no way a rant on those that were popular. Anyways, he attracted people that wanted to share the limelight with him, and he just happened to be my parents' go-to for a quick sitter. Because of their frequent last-minute requests for an adult, his friends began to pick up on his responsibilities at our house. On one such evening, I went to bed at the usual time for an 8-year-old. 9 o'clock. The minute I walked up the stairs, I swear I heard more than one voice. Within an hour there was a full-fledged party at my house. The neighbor had obviously lost control of the situation, and instead of dealing with it like a man, he was only 16. He called the police. My parents came home about 15 minutes after the police arrived at the house. They were immediately questioned as if they were responsible for the goings on at their house while away. Apparently, the neighbor had gone back to his own house and called in a noise complaint on our house. Too bad for him that I was still awake and feeling like the coolest kid on earth. Since I had a bunch of cool teenagers partying at my house, I had no problem telling the cops exactly what happened. I thought they would want to know I was cool enough to hang out with high schoolers. TLDR had a cool neighbor babysit me. He then threw a party and got busted. My mom hired a babysitter for my sister once. I thought she was nice. One day she wasn't there anymore. My mother told me she'd been fired. I said AWW. That's not fair. She was awesome. My mother explained she had been taking my sister to her house during the day, then bringing her back in the afternoon before my parents got home. I was still too young to really understand what was wrong with that picture, so I questioned why that was so bad. My mom said, "Let's take a drive." We drove about 10 minutes and ended up in a trailer park with people smoking blunts on their front steps. Pregnant women everywhere and no 2 consecutive teeth to be found in a single person's mouth. This is where she lives. I recently watched Lord of the Rings with my 7-month-old niece. The argument me and her father had on him not being there for the occasion was humorous. Gone. Hired a 14-year-old neighbor girl to watch my then 3-year-old daughter for 3 hours. I came home and daughter was alone on kitchen floor. More about that in a sec. So I'm like, where the heck is the babysitter? Called her mom and she said, "Oh." I yelled for her to come home because it was getting dark. And she went. Turns out she never told her mom she was babysitting. Anyhow, my daughter was fine. She was just sitting on the floor with a big pan. In the pan she had cracked 48 eggs and was mixing them in the bowl. It was close to Easter and I had bought them for the kids of the family to color. Anyhow, moral of story: be careful of young teen babysitters and learn to love omelets. My nanny managed to steal about $8,000 from my parents in the span of a few months. And they let her keep it too. Backstory: see, my parents owned a business and brought home the money from the registers. She would take little by little from the money bag and purses and such. And eventually, arising suspicion, one day she took a very noticeable amount at once, a couple $1,000s. Which my parents noticed right before depositing to the bank. They immediately went back home and cornered her cash and pockets. She was about 16, so my parents took her to her family's house where to get yelled at. Since her family was very poor, my parents felt sorry for the pathetic little shit. So they let her keep the money. She's probably still poor with a billion kids who steal. Or maybe she learned such a lesson of mercy that she changed her ways. No one will ever know. Or maybe she's dead. Icky Vicky was ruining my son's life. I used to babysit 2 mentally challenged twins of 9 who were really difficult to deal with. One was extremely competitive. He would claim that one day he'd be strong enough to kill me. The other would usually just be completely zoned out. Until his twin pissed him off. Suddenly he would become really angry and attack. One night he grabbed a letter opener. The parents later came home to me sitting on the stairs as a barrier. The competitive twin angrily stuck upstairs. And the spacey one zoned out on the couch. Built a 4 feet tall house of cards around my sleeping 1-year-old. That's when I realized we have way more playing cards than any human should ever own. She cleaned the house and folded laundry. I babysit 3 kids between the ages of 3 and 11. It's great, but babysitting kids sometimes makes you do the silliest things. One time the 3-year-old went to get a piece of cheese out of the fridge. But she doesn't just grab it and go. She goes, almost, completely inside of the fridge to get it. I decided that it would be funny to slowly shut the fridge door and make it into a little game of UHO. Better hurry. Right as I had the door almost shut, it wouldn't be able to shut all the way with her in there anyway. Her parents walk in through the side door, the faces directly in front of the fridge. Not sure when was going through their mind when they saw the babysitter shutting their toddler, who is hysterically giggling, in the fridge. But they had a laugh. Paid me. And I still babysit them to this day, so it couldn't have affected my reputation that much. A longtime friend of ours had her parents babysit for her. When she came home, her dad was gone and mom had been crying. All she would say is that they got into a fight and she was leaving the dad. Of course my friend was upset and pressed, but mom stayed to her story. They had a fight. She kicked him out and she was leaving him. Later on, when her mom went to bed, her husband remembered they had a nanny cam in their daughter's room. They decided to watch to see if they could hear the fighting through it. Instead, she saw her dad sexually molesting her 6-year-old daughter and her mom coming and catching him. He ended up going to prison over it and plead guilty since he was caught red-handed on the camera. He's in his 50s and they sentenced him to 25 years or some large amount. The weird thing is, my friend said her dad never did anything to her in any way growing up and wasn't pervy in any way. My wife spent many nights over at her house growing up and he was the nicest guy. Our friend disowned her mom over it since she was willing to hide what happened, and they haven't talked in a few years. It's pretty sad. She and her husband went out for a fun night to come home to basically losing both her parents and having to see her young daughter be assaulted. I dated a guy who told me his sister had hired an old lady to babysit her daughter while she worked. She came home one day and her daughter was tied to a clothesline by a dog leash. The woman genuinely didn't see anything wrong with it. She just figured, well, she gets to run around outside all day. When I was a teenager, I babysat for this woman all summer one year. I was bringing the kids home from the park one day and this guy just walks right into the house and doesn't say a word. Goes into the kitchen and pulls out a freezer bag full of weed and leaves. I called her and she just said, "Oh yeah, that's my nephew doing a few runs for me today." Family friend of ours always had live-in babysitters from other countries. One time the parents came home and found the babysitter, from Nigeria or something, was sitting on the floor crying. She told them she was only 15 and couldn't handle the job. They were horrified. They had no clue she was underage. When I was a kid, my babysitter always kissed me, hugged me and took pictures that she kept in her wallet labeled as my baby boy. 3 parents did not like it, so they fired her. I remember seeing her crying and even fighting to take me home with her. A few weeks ago I found out she was my real mother. Cries like a bitch. The babysitter was trying on my mother's clothes when I was lying there unattended. So I am told. This isn't the parents coming home, but it's something similar. When I was young, my uncle was in college near where I grew up. He would come over and babysit my brothers and me from time to time. Also, he drove a motorcycle since he was 19-20, and we were all around 6 or so. We loved playing sports with him. One night, we made up our own game, which involved us throwing all of the Nerf balls we had laying around down the stairs, where he, wearing his motorcycle helmet, would head them away. One night it rained while he was on the way over, so he put his clothes in the dryer while we played the Nerf to helmet game. He still had boxers on. Internet people. After a bit, he saw a look of horror on our faces. He lifted up the visor of his helmet, then turned around to see a crowd of 20-30 Christmas carolers staring through our all-glass front door at this guy in only underwear and a motorcycle helmet having Nerf balls thrown at his head. He's the best and now I babysit his kids. They're not as fun. TLDR, babysitter in underwear and a helmet in front of a couple dozen strangers. Oh man. My babysitter was awesome. Parents never caught us in the act, but they saw the evidence. You see, my babysitter taught 6-year-old me how to sled down the stairs in a laundry basket. At the bottom of our stairs was our front door, with glass panels on the side. So on my 3rd or 4th attempt we got too much speed, as I realized we were gonna smack right into that glass. I went from hell yeah to wash it. Reenactment, http I imgur com yjqqs2j jpg. Corner of the basket cracked the glass. Took the parents a day or two to notice it. They thought it was our dumb Dalmatian who liked to run into things. This moth earthka ran into traffic. Got hit by an RV going 25-30 mph. And came back with just a whimper. Thickest damn skull. I eventually fessed up because I loved cinders. Open bracket. I used to work for a business that sold and installed security cameras. My boss had just finished soldering a pinhole camera into the guts of a VCR and was going to market it as a nanny cam. So he puts it in his entertainment center. Takes his wife out for the evening to try it out. See how it held up with his own sitter. Sitter's boyfriend shows up and he gets footage of them F-king on the couch. Sitter gets fired. Tape was destroyed before anyone else saw it, for those who are wondering. When my sister was young, 5 years old, my parents left her with the neighborhood babysitter to go to a dinner party. The babysitter spent the entire night leading my sister to believe that my parents were dead. And they were never coming back. The whole experience was pretty traumatic for her. And she remembers it to this day. Fast forward like 20 years. My sister sees the babysitter at a local bar. Brings up the whole F-ked up story. Throws a drink on her and publicly humiliates her. I was proud. I was in charge of 3-year-old twins for a day in the summer. We were playing a game called Garbage, in which I pick up one child, hang them over my shoulder, and ask the other child where he went. Oh Gordy, have you seen Fred? No? Me neither. Guess I better take out the garbage. Double quote. And then I would proceed to take the child to the front door before realizing what I was carrying. We played this game for hours. Until the parents came home and I stopped to greet them and clean up. As I was chatting with the parents, Gordy came in and said, "Liz, I want to be garbage. You said I was garbage. Put Emmy outside. I'm garbage." Double quote. And then burst into a gigantic crying tantrum. I was probably 5. And I was the kid. The babysitter was normal. Fed me. Put me to bed on time. I woke up. And it was super smoky. I don't remember any of this. But apparently she hotboxed my room. Mine, because she needed to watch me. And got super high. My mom ended up bringing me to the hospital because I was so high I was having difficulty breathing.